Well, welcome everybody. Hi, this is a pleasure for me to make this interview with none other but Christopher Paolini. Christopher, how are you since the last time we met in Paris?
Less sleep deprived.
Yeah.
I'm back home. I got back home Saturday night after 37 days of touring in North America and then Europe. I had an amazing time meeting everyone. Of course, we got to meet while I was there in Paris. I managed to get sick on tour, of course, but fortunately, I was still able to do all my events, and everyone was awesome. So, absolutely fantastic book tour, and I'm so glad I was able to do it.
I'm so glad as well to be able to meet you, to exchange. So by then I had already read Murtagh because I didn't know if we could make the interview or not. So in that regard, I made sure to have read Murtagh by the end of November. It was actually a bit speed, but
Mm.
it was a good experience nonetheless. I was making like 15 pages a day. So it's a kind of a big pace, a brisk pace.
Mm.
So today I have several categories of questions. So I'm beginning with Murtagh, right into it. So
So we're gonna
let's,
do a full spoiler conversation.
yeah, let's do this. All right,
Okay.
now the viewer is advised. So it was a wonderful book. I was surprised to see more of Murtagh's pasts, and there is something that struck me at the beginning. It was that I saw a parallel in Murtagh's life, a symmetry with his and that of Eragon. So we know that Eragon was raised as a humble farmer, whereas Murtagh was raised in court. But now Eragon plays a mayor place, a major role in the world. He has all the comfort he needs. He no longer lives in a thrifty environment.
Hmm.
Whereas Murtagh is set to travel the world without a roof over his head, at the beginning of the book at least. And I was wondering regarding these circumstances, what does this exchange of places means to you, and what is your vision of fate?
Well, that's a tricky question.
Mm,
I was thinking very, you know, carefully about the parallels between Murtagh's experience and Aragon's. And sometimes while I was writing the book, I found parallels emerging that I didn't originally expect. Um, for example, when they leave Gilead, Thorn kind of grabs Murtagh and they have a involuntary flight where Murtagh is trying to get Thorn to land and Thorn won't listen to him. And that's very similar to when the first time Eragon and Saphira flew together after leaving Palancar Valley, right when the Razak showed up. So there are lots of things over the course of the story that have sort of echoes with Eragon's experience. Some of that was intentional, some of that was purely coincidental. But I thought it made for an interesting contrast.
mm,
As for my vision of fate, I go back and forth on that. I think, as many of my characters do, that it's important to believe that we have some agency in the world, even if things are predestined. If you feel as if things are predestined, you'll give up. And whether that's predestined or not, I don't know. But I like to believe that I have a sense of control over my life, and even if there is a destiny that can't be escaped, we at least have a choice of how to face it.
mm. We still play the game, no matter if we, regardless of the fact that we don't know all the rules.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think that our lives are written in stone, or that things can't be improved or changed. If that were the case, humanity would never have bettered its lot over the centuries.
Mm. As do I. That will be quite of a bitter paradigm in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that there's a unfortunate thread in modern thinking that kind of says that, the situation you're born in and the life circumstances you find yourself is completely out of your control, and as a result, you cannot rise above that, and you should blame those who are the supposedly to blame for that situation. And whether or not that's true, I just think it's a very unhelpful way to think about life, because then you feel helpless. You feel like someone else is responsible for your situation, and therefore they're the ones with the power in life. And
Mm.
I always feel that we are the ones in charge of our own thoughts and feelings. You know, the only thing you can control is yourself, ideally at least. And we are the agents of change in our own lives, even in the smallest ways. So that sort of learned helplessness is just a deadly, deadly way of thinking.
And the vicious circle even more, because
Yeah.
just feels even more helplessness and
Yeah,
just
and it
feels
leads people to becoming very angry, I think, and that's not good for them or society.
Hmm, I agree. Well, that's something that appeared to me in Murtagh, because he, of course, chose to disregard Yumarolth's advice and go where the land is brutal. Um, but even if he puts himself, or even if you put him through so much, he still chose and decides what's the outcome of his ventures.
Hmm.
He does
Well,
not.
that is the consequence of freedom. You have to
Mm,
let people make stupid decisions. Democracy, freedom, whatever, you have to trust that it's better in the long run for people to have the chance to make stupid decisions. That just because you know better, you shouldn't be the ones telling them ultimately what they can or can't do, as long as it's not harming other people.
yeah, not interfering with one's free will and experience, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what I stumbled upon that quote. It was, "We learn more in 10 days of agony than in 10 years of satisfaction." So I could not think of Murtagh with that quote. So what do you
Yeah.
think will be the most important of lessons he learned during his, if I may say so, sejour in Gorgoth?
I would rather not say. I think that
Yeah,
that would be me preaching to the readers. I'll let readers decide what they think the most valuable lesson is from that experience.
fair, very fair. Um, well, so another one, when it comes down to Murtagh, and not only Murtagh, all the inheritance cycle as well, that I, by the way, had the chance to reread in English recently,
Mm.
which was quite an experience. I try to imagine what it is to create characters, and if some of them have the purpose to vehicle a particular message or stand as a parable for a message, or an idea, and if yes, what does Bashel means to you in a deeper way?
Ah, boy. I think Bashel, to me, represents unquestioning belief and also the tyranny of um, unchecked power and control over people's lives. I think what differentiates Bashel from a real world cult leader, for example, is that this actually kind of made it interesting to me, which is the Dreamers and Bashel are rational in the sense that they are believing in something that actually exists.
Hmm.
You know, the power that they are in awe of and that they are afraid of and that they worship actually exists. So, I mean, and the same is true of the priests of Helgrind. So, in a sense, they are not irrational to have that reaction. I mean, you might argue it's the wrong reaction. I would argue that they're overdoing it and the reaction is wrong and perhaps even evil. But they have more reason for their belief than a lot of people sometimes do because they have physical evidence on an ongoing basis of their um, uh, object of worship.
Yeah, and like the dwarves, say for the wraith-like apparition of Guntara, which is what
Mm.
area points in the second book.
Yeah, exactly. But again, Bashel would to me represent unchecked fanatical belief as well as personal exploitation of one's power over others.
I see. And since I believe we all have a theater of puppets within us, we all have to check our inner tyrant, tiny as it may be, every once in a while. That was what Michelle made me think of. Yeah, are you not not second guessing, but double checking yourself enough? I always try to, when I read something. Yeah, what could the character say that is not written?
Mm, yeah.
So in regard of Murtagh or any other part of your work, what's something that I've always asked myself while reading a book? What's the most intense moment for you during the creative process when you are in the midst of writing a novel?
That's not something anyone's ever asked me before. That's a good question. A lot of it is intense. I think that I'm going to divide it into two sections. So the creative process itself, in the sense that where I'm creating the story and the characters and the world.
Hmm.
In this case, of course, the world was pretty much in place. But in the outlining phase, I should say, that's a lot of fun. There's some pressure in the sense that I know if I don't get it right in that stage, that no matter how well I write the book, it won't hang together particularly well for the reader. So there's strain in that sense, that I really want to get it right. But I wouldn't say there's any real pressure because there's no deadlines at that point. I'm not actually writing the book. Uh, During the writing itself, there's definitely strain and intensity in wanting to get it right and do a good job of writing each individual scene and chapter and storyline. And sometimes that can get difficult, especially if I feel like I'm not really getting where I need to get in terms of the effect on the reader. And I had that in a couple places in the first draft with Murtagh. One was with the character of Bishel herself, who was quite
Yeah.
different in the first draft. And then another one actually was the whole Gilead sequence, where I had my original idea for that sequence is actually what happens now in terms of the Weird kittens and all of that. And then I second guessed
Amazing part.
myself. I guessed myself and thought, well, maybe that's a little cheesy. Maybe I won't have like a ticking time bomb sort of ticking clock element to that sequence. So I'm just gonna not have that, but he'll still have these various adventures as he's in order to earn this information from the Weird Caravel. And the problem is it removed any sense of tension from that sequence. So I ended up having to rework a lot of the Gilead sequence to reintroduce that element, bring in the tension, and make it all work. But both of those things happened in the second chunk, which I was going to say, which is revision. And revision and editing tends to be the most intense part of the process because at that point we're usually under deadline. We've committed to a release date, and things are happening on the publishing side, the business side of things that are sort of like immovable, unstoppable forces.
Yeah.
So
The ticking
that
itself.
the ticking clock in the real world, and that tends to be the most intense part because it's not that I can't do the work. I always can, and I always am able to get where I want to go. I'm not stressed about that. It's just like instead of having 2 months to do something, now you got to do it in 2 weeks. And oh hey, you got a new baby, you got to take care of at the same time, and that's what makes it really intense. So long answer to a short question.
Yeah, but still, I had more than I supposed to. It's true that when you're on my side of the book, you see all these lines, all these words, and you wonder how is it to, what happens behind closed door, what you never see. How is it
Yeah.
to be at one's desk and to uh, do your utmost to write a book when there's all this external pressure? It's
Well, you have to just kind of shut
or
it down. You just have to ignore it when you sit down to do the work, even if you're aware there's a deadline.
mm,
All writing is ultimately is problem solving. So you just keep tackling the problems piece by piece, and you do
mm,
your best to solve them as fast as you can and as well as you can, and then let the chips fall where they may.
good. Although my endeavor, my job is way different than yours, I can relate to that part quite a bit. A lot of
Mm.
steps and little chunks. So
Yeah.
um, once again, I was wondering, still on the writing part, do you write your characters with a secret that you only know of? I've heard some authors do that, and I think it can add an interesting depth. Sorry, about the characters. And do you do this?
Not consciously. I To me, writing is in order to write well, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. and thus you have to be willing to share whatever you're feeling with regard to the character or the story or the storyline. So if you hold back for fear of what other people would think, then you won't write the best version of the story you possibly could. And the same holds true for the characters. I try to share everything of what the character's thinking and feeling with the readers where it's appropriate. Are there things that I could go even deeper into? Are there things that I think of that don't always make it into the books? Absolutely. But I'm not trying to withhold information from the readers. To me, that's a little counterproductive.
Okay. I was actually asking myself these questions: how much of the characters is from your own personal innermost questions, and what is made up? But of course, I won't be asking you that. That'll be too personal. But you mentioned something right now about the feelings of the characters and their inner turmoils, and it's a question that struck me. Was there a particular experience in your life that suggested you that it was ultimately through compassion and empathy that Eragon will vanquish Galbatorix?
No. It was the result of sort of a long chain of logic while writing the books, and a lot of thinking I'd been doing about violence and responses to violence and when it's appropriate to use violence. So part of the chain of logic was the fact that I just got sick of writing sword fights. I wrote a lot of sword fights between Eragon and Arya, Eragon and Murtagh, and of course Roran's hammer fights. So resolving the entire series' conflict just through a physical confrontation felt inadequate. There needed to be a moral component to it. And actually, fair point. One of my own criticisms for myself here is that I feel like I failed to do that with Roran when he in Inheritance, as part of his storyline. There really should have been a little bit slightly deeper resolution to his storyline and his confrontation with Barst that taught us something new or resulted in a change in his character. Roran's character is a little different than Eragon's because he's already grown up in a lot of ways and thus is not resolving the same issues. But a good arc, a good journey would have reflected on what was happening with Eragon and Galbatorix. So how Roran defeats Barst in some ways should stand in contrast to how Eragon defeats Galbatorix. And maybe it does, but that's something I would have spent more time or taken another look at were I to do that now. But again, so with Eragon and Galbatorix, just one more sword fight was inadequate. And so much of the story with Eragon involved him, paying attention to the lives of the ants and learning about the different, groups in Alagasia, the Urgles, the dwarves, this and that. So all of that played into this decision to have him defeat Galbatorix in that manner. And with all of that, the fact that I really didn't want there to be some obvious way of defeating Galbatorix. Like, Galbatorix isn't stupid. He protected himself in all of the ways that one might think of protecting himself, and he's had a long time to think about that. So it needed to be something that was non-obvious. Non-obvious and yet inevitable.
Yeah, and it sure wasn't expected. Well, although back then I finished reading the Inheritance cycle for the first time 10 years ago, these were my first big book that I was reading on my own, first novel, so I had no idea of the writing structures, what was involved in that. So I remember that I loved this experience because I was always surprised. I never wanted to guess anything. I just wanted to let myself being in awe, and that played a huge part in my conserving the magic inherent to this universe. So about the end of Murtagh, I was wondering how, given the new paradigm, Naswada being a queen, I wondered, as decades will go on in the future, how will she manage to have, at the same time, potent enough magicians and keeping control of the magic in her realm, especially since she's not a magician herself.
Right. I mean, that is the problem she's grappling with, and it's a difficult one. I think the solution she's settled on at the moment is insufficient, with drugging people who don't want to
Yeah.
join Duvran Gargata or don't want to swear this or that. So my thought is that now that Murtagh is spending time with her, and Murtagh has had this experience of being controlled by Bashel's breath, he has a unique perspective on all of this, and perhaps that will help guide Nasawada's thoughts and approaches moving forward.
Okay. To make maybe a better censorship or everything, but the void would
Yeah.
help.
But I mean, it's a problem. I mean, I've seen people criticize Nasawada's choices with how to deal with the magicians, and I'll happily agree it's not ideal, but it's also not ideal to have random people wandering around who can kill you with a word or who can slip into your mind and control you, and you have no defense against that. It's a major, major problem, and no one would put up with it in the real world. Like if you knew that was a possibility and you suspected someone of being a magician,
Hmm.
I mean, that's the sort of thing where, you know, witch hunts and magician hunts start actually making a lot of sense. Maybe not on a individual moral level, but from a societal standpoint, it starts making a lot of sense why you might kill those people.
Yeah. It's like the gun situation, but in worse. If I no, maybe it's
Yeah.
not a parallel. Um, sorry. Well, there was a lot more that happened in Murtagh. Well, I'll just make this parenthesis because it's been on my mind for a while and I don't want to forget it. So I've heard on several occasions that you were fond of bad puns and dad jokes.
Yes.
So it occurred to me that, well, save the fact that the plot of Gilead was a bit fishy at the end.
Yes.
Yeah, you really put Murtagh through a lot, and it made me both smile and ache for him. And
Hmm.
I admire the fact that, regardless of the past they had together, in this book, Murtagh really is digging for later.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
I
no, I did. I
landed.
did. I did put him through it. And one of the reasons is because he, although it was not his choice, he did some pretty unpleasant things. And coming to terms with that was never going to be easy. Um, yeah, and I think he will have an easier time of it moving forward now. He'll never have the life that Eragon has, but I think he has a chance at a more normal life now, as normal as he'll ever have a night life.
Yeah, as normal as it can be for him as well. I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he wakes up in a cold sweat, having some bad dreams for a couple of years. But I think he's on the path to healing.
Yeah, that was an approach that touched me a lot with Murtagh and Thorne's relationship, all the PTSD they had, and understandably so. And that's a question that occurred to me as I was reading Murtagh. The scenes where Thorne was being put in an arena when he was young, is it a
Mm,
vision or is it a real recollection of Murtagh?
that was a real
Oh, that's
recollection.
harsh. Oh, that's so
Yeah.
harsh. I had a doubt, but it could be both, and Hugh, it's hard. Um, So, well, there's more questions to go. One that is a bit unrelated. Well, not first that one. Um, a funnier question that occurred to me is if there will be a duel between Mr. Stabber, which technically, if I'm not mistaken, cannot be broken, and Tinkle
Mm.
Death that can cut through almost everything, how the duel will ensue.
That's a really good question. Probably, I mean, I would guess that Mr. Stabby could hold off Tinkle Death, at least for a time.
Well,
But trying to block a sword with a fork is very, very difficult. So I wouldn't want to try.
cool. And yeah, I was thinking of this whole unstoppable force, immovable object kind of
Mm,
question. And will we know in that instance more about the creation of Tinkledeath one day?
maybe. I don't have any specific plans to go into the backstory of that, but I have more planned to write about Angela.
Yeah.
So it may come up in the course of, the book. Someone might just ask her about it, and then
Cool.
I'll have to give you some details.
And well, speaking of which, in about Angela, will we ever know what befell the two women we met in Brisingar for whom she tossed the dragon knucklebones?
I hope so. They have always been the subject of another story that I've wanted to
Mm,
write. Um, I have a lot of these stories, and I need to actually write them. I'm going to be writing another Tales from Malagasia fairly soon.
okay.
Another short story collection. So I might toss some of these stories into a short story collection so that I can actually knock some of them out in a reasonable amount of time. I mean, like the Worm of Kalkaris, which was the last story in The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, could have been an entire book. I could have easily written that as a full-length novel and had a great deal of fun doing so. But it just, it's one of those things would have taken forever then in order to get to any of my other books.
We mentioned at the beginning that the parallels between Eragon's and Murtagh's life, and some of it was the death of a mentor, Thornak for
Hmm.
Brom for Eragon.
Yeah.
And since Murtagh and Brom, well, met briefly, I was
Yeah.
wondering, had we had more time with Brom, had he considered Murtagh for simply who he is or whose son he is?
I think he would have needed to have gotten to know Murtagh some. I think he would have been immediately suspicious of him, especially
Hmm?
given the circumstances under which they met. And of course, meeting him would have been a very emotional experience for Brahm, given his history with Morzan. So it would have been difficult. And of course, once Murtagh realized who Brahm was and that he was responsible for killing Morzan, then that would have made it that much more difficult.
Eragon will have been so clueless in that moment.
Oh yeah, I mean, but that's kind of the definition of Eragon in the first couple of
Yeah.
books. Is he has no idea what's going on. He's like, who, me, what?
Yeah. What's happening? Am I stuck on
Exactly,
the cliff once more?
exactly.
So, wow, so many more questions. I'm gonna go through them. No, we have time. We have
Yeah,
time.
we have time. Ask the questions.
Very good. I'm sure I'm forgetting things right now. Hopefully, they'll come back to my mind as we speak. Something that I wanted to ask you. We all know that Saphira is a great mead aficionado. Is it something that's only her fancy, or do some of the dragons also like that?
Some other dragons definitely enjoy drinking, so it's not just Saphira.
there was probably some wild parties in Rowingard then.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's actually a common thing in the wild. And lots of animals will try to get fermented berries and
Hmm.
essentially get themselves drunk. So I think other dragons probably enjoy a good drink now and then.
Well, now that you say that's true, because it's a notorious tale in my family. My great grandfather had a magpie. She was
Mm.
known in all the town, and yeah, actually, alcoholism ended up being her demise.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, she was drinking wine at the fair, and she fell in a pit
Oh,
like a century ago. So her memory will now live on forever.
their memory lives on. It seems to be the smarter the animal, the more they like alcohol. So there you go.
Yeah, and actually, I had a magpie 4 summers ago, and if you ever find a magpie fallen from its nest, don't keep it for too long because it's a really mischievous animal,
Oh yeah,
more than we can
they're
think of.
yeah. Well, because they're in the corvid family, the
Mm.
crow slash raven family, and they're very much like jays or crows or ravens. Very
Yeah,
smart. We used to have magpies in a nest right outside our house, and they wake up so early in the morning,
yeah, too early, and
too
they're
early,
proud about it. So it's
and they let everyone know that they're awake.
as well, as well. So speaking of, oh, it's very smooth. Speaking of being woken up too early in Brisinga, Runan say something while forging, well, the sword Brisinga, that children have something special. They are born, if I quote, with gifts of grace and power that no grown elf can hope to match, and
Hmm.
their blossom withers over time. How do you feel about that quote now that you are a father and that you have children?
Oh, I stand by it.
Cool. It's beautiful.
I mean, I think you could say the same is true for human children to a degree. You know, they're born with a share of innocence and beauty, even that we all lose as we age. We gain things in return. We gain wisdom, we gain knowledge, we gain strength. Hopefully, we gain patience and kindness also. But there is something special about childhood, a timelessness, which I suppose goes back to innocence. And of course, with the elves, since they're tied into magic in ways that we aren't, there are other factors in play as well.
They have powers or abilities that somehow outstretch that of any adult elf.
Well, my thought was the inhibitions are lower. The barriers between them and the flow of magic is different. And so they are more naturally inclined toward wild magic, that is, magic unbounded by the ancient language. And not that it always happens, but just in general, I think with the elven children, you never quite know what might happen. And then as they get older, as they hit their equivalent of adolescence, it all becomes much more constrained and adult.
Okay. And yeah, by the way, when are you considered an adult for the elves? Like 50 years old?
I don't want to commit to an actual number
Yeah.
at the moment. I'd have to look at it. I know I've always thought about. I mean, a very rough guide would be like 20 to 30 is kind of their teenage years,
Okay.
roughly, and then yeah, you're not considered a young adult until well after that. And I try to think when Arya took up her role as ambassador and left Do Varden, and it might have been when she was like 20 or 30, something like that.
Yeah.
So she would have been really, kind of too young to do that, but it'd be like a 18, 19-year-old going off to join the Foreign Legion or something. But people do that. People do that.
That's true, they do. And yeah, partly out of defiance toward her mother back then, if I recall well. Sure. So something completely unrelated now. You mentioned in a series of questions about fractal noise that the idea of the book came to you through a very vivid dream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like the burrow grubs in a nightmare.
It was the same dream, so yes.
Whoa, the same
Well,
dream.
it was the same night of dreams.
Okay, what a night.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Wow, I don't know. I don't want to know the correlation between the burrow grubs and the huge hole of fractal noise that must have been cold sweats as well. So as I reread the sentences in Inheritance, I actually found a website of an anthology of many of your quotes, and some of them really struck me in the deepest of ways. And I'd like to know your point of view on the idea that when we're asleep, our mind or soul, some says, wander off and act as a net, unbeknownst to us, and grabs ideas in egregores, or which may lead to us waking up in the morning with sudden ideas, realizations. What do you think about this?
I mean, I think it's a very common occurrence. The whole point of creativity is that you connect two things or two or more things that are seemingly unconnected. I mean, that's what a metaphor is, or simile. And her love was like a red, red rose. It's not literally a rose, but you're connecting two things to make a point. So when you sleep, the barriers in your mind sort of descend, and it's much easier to connect things. And there does seem to be some indication that if you are trying to solve a certain problem or working on something in the back of your head, that your subconscious, whatever the hell the subconscious is, this older, more instinctual part of the brain continues to work on the problem even while you sleep. I mean, there have been multiple instances of scientists and inventors, engineers who have actually thought of the solutions to their problems that they're trying to solve
Yeah.
while dreaming. So it's a known phenomena, and it's something that I do try to take advantage of. Sometimes I will think of things I'm trying to solve right before I go to sleep. The trick is you can't do it in a way that stresses you so that it keeps you up. So you can so don't do this if it's going to keep you up. But it doesn't stress me to think about what I'm trying to figure out with the writing. So I'll think about that as I'm falling asleep, and a lot of times, I'll have a better idea in the morning or a better sense of what path to pursue. And sometimes I'll actually dream of a solution. But the weird thing is, when I'm actually working on a story, I don't dream about it. It's like I spend all day thinking about it, so then when I stop writing, I don't want to think about it anymore. But what I will sometimes dream about, and what I will often daydream about, are the stories I want to write in the future. So once I actually start writing, it doesn't seem to bother me at night. And once I actually write a first draft, it purges the story from my brain. I really do stop dreaming about it at that point, because it's like it's done. I finished it, which is sometimes what makes it hard to revise, because then I'm having to force my brain to go back onto something that my brain is saying, "You finished. It's done. Leave it alone." And that's one reason why that's actually a very strong motivation to write some of these stories, so that I can stop thinking about them after 10, 20 years.
Sort of a self-exorcism.
Absolutely.
But I do emphasize with thinking of something when you're falling asleep and just brushing it off at the same time, like a cloth that you put beside your bed. It doesn't prevent you from sleeping. I've noticed that in some funny ways as well.
There's also some very solid research that says that if you're trying to learn something, whatever that something is, put in a couple hours of study, practice, whatever it is, and then you need to sleep in order for your brain to consolidate that knowledge. So if you pull an all-nighter studying, you're not going to retain the information very well. But if you were able to sleep even for just 3 hours, it allows the brain to take that temporary knowledge and encode it in more permanent memory. And that, seems to be a very important part of the process.
Yeah, and it's quite edifying when I try to implement the famous 10-minute naps when I want to glue in my brain some big chunks of monologue that I have to write to learn for one day to the other, because my agent, and thank God, just sent me an audition. It works well. It does work.
I'm a big fan of coffee naps. So I will drink a cup of coffee, usually my second cup of coffee, and then I'll go take a nap, and I will nap for about 30 minutes, because after 30 minutes, the coffee wakes me up.
Yeah.
And I find that 15 to 30 minutes is the perfect length of a nap for me. And if I go past that, I need to sleep for about 3 hours, because otherwise I get into the middle of a REM cycle. And if I wake up in the middle of a REM cycle, I'm just like groggy and drugged, and I feel worse than if I hadn't napped at all.
Yeah, because a new cycle of sleep actually began. So I think we read the same article. I've implemented that as well. And
the information has been bouncing around for a while, but yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, if you're on book tour, the way I have been for a while, you gain the ability to just close your eyes at any point and take a 10-minute nap, 15-minute nap anywhere, and it at least helps you stay upright.
I do relate to that as well, though in different contexts. Since you mentioned scientists, it seems related to my next question, although it's not about sleep, but about the ancient language and the power of intuition. It's one thing that, if not the most, one thing that interested me the most in your books. It's all that can be done with intention and the power of words, and the parallels between that in Adacasia and in our own life. So I've been growing increasingly interested in the work of Mitchell Krakow and in intention groups in general, where, case in point, people a bit like the elves who gather and chant for the trees will focus their intentions, their gathered intentions, harness them, direct them in a particular outcome, oftentimes healing diseased cells. And the result of that study that I read was an, if not significant, observable diminution of the tumoral cells So
Mm.
I was wondering if you thought that somewhere in the future, as the decades will go on, we could see people have abilities that were like dormant or forgotten, such as healing, telepathy, or
Yeah. I mean, I don't think telepathy is um, possible from what I've read in my knowledge of physics, but I think we're going to end up with technologically enabled telepathy. There's already been research on this where they've been able to transmit essentially thoughts and feelings between people, by actually connecting the brains and transmitting the signals. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with actual telepathy at some point via technology. I am wary of getting too far into magical thinking with what is possible, but I do think it's pretty obvious that there is a incredibly strong link between our brains and the rest of our bodies.
Mm.
And and if you think about it, our thoughts physically change the cells in our body. And I can prove that. If you wake up in the morning and you're laying in bed and you're just having a nice lazy morning and you lay there for a little while and then you think, I need to get up, I'm going to get up. And then you get up. That thought in your brain causes a cascade of effects all the way down to the cells in your muscles, which cause them to contract as you sit up and roll out of bed and get up and go brush your teeth and do whatever else you do in your morning routine. So the very thoughts, the neurons firing in our brains and whatever else is going on in there actually changes the cells elsewhere in our body, which means there's this incredible link between the thoughts we have, the feelings we have, and
Yeah.
our physical existence. And I think it's not implausible to me that there are people who have mastered that to a degree that perhaps other people haven't, who have really focused on that link and explored it and are able to do things that, perhaps someone else can't, some sort of psychosomatic link. I do know in my own life that being very careful about the language I use when speaking about myself and my own work has been helpful in terms of productivity and mental and mood. So don't badmouth yourself. Don't
Mm.
say oh man, I'm an idiot. I should have done this.
Yeah.
No, don't say that. And don't say bad things about life in general or your situation. It really does. Even if you don't really mean it, there's some research, and this is my experience, is that your body doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
You treat those words like reality in some ways. So I'm not endorsing magical thinking. I'm not saying everything's sunshine and roses and go around pretending that it is. But maintaining a sense of clarity about how you think about things
Mm.
and then how that affects you is uh, really important. I saw a quote recently. It might have been Stephen Fry who was quoting someone else. I don't know,
Okay.
but it was something to the effect of like we are under no obligation to be the same person moment to moment. By which they mean we can remake ourselves moment to moment, and that's true. At the same time, our basic tendencies and interests and physical reactions are often set very early in life. I mean, I remember when I was 3 years old, I was running around with other kids, picking up sticks to make them into swords and imagining adventures, and here I am at
Yeah.
40 still doing the same thing. So a lot of our basic uh, nature is very much nature. It's our genetics, it's our the environment we were in the womb, it's the food we were fed growing up. All of this has an effect. The emotions we were exposed to growing up, the treatment we
Mm.
had, all of that has an effect. But at the same time, we have an enormous amount of control from the inside, and
Yeah.
that I find incredibly empowering and interesting. And that's actually why, with Fractal Noise, I ended the book with a quote from Camus about Sisyphus. That I'm forgetting the exact quote, but it's actually, wait, I got the book here.
Yeah. He won't resent you, I think, but it's not worked properly.
Let me just get this right because it's important to me. I conclude that all is well, says Oedipus, and that remark is sacred. And that's perhaps some magical thinking, but again, it's all we have control over is we can choose whether or not we feel miserable about what's happening or not. And the thing is, like, I know I'm ranting, but
It's fair.
You can endure anything if you think it's worth enduring. If you have a big enough why, you can endure anything. And I think the great challenge of modern life, especially if it's secular life, if you're not religious, is figuring out what your why is. And hopefully it's a productive one that allows you to live a happy, fulfilled life and, doing all the things you need to do in life to be a good person and hopefully make those around you happy as well. But that why will let you get through life. Because, face it, life's hard for everyone in various ways. And it gets especially hard at the end of life. So you need a good why.
Well, I had many things coming up in my mind as in when you were speaking. This quote you just said is very important because all is well. I have come to notice, or to, well, it's not too arrogant to say understand, I'm just 22 years old, that the more objective we strive to remain in front of what comes at us, the more peaceful existence tends to become. When we strive toward equanimity as much as possible.
Yeah.
And,
well, I mean that's the Stoics. That's what the Stoics were pursuing. And there is a fine line between Stoicism and fatalism, where you just throw your hands up and say, what will be, will be. It's in the hands of the fates or God or whatever. And it's out of my control. That can also lead to that sense of learned helplessness. So I think it's important to not necessarily fall into that trap either. But what's so difficult is there are things in life we can't avoid. Like we're all going to die at some point. That's an unavoidable thing. Yet at the same time, we have to find ways to function and have motivation and all of that, which is important. But I agree. I think having a sense of equilibrium, a sense of stoicism, really, really helps in life. And recognizing, not beating yourself up over lack of discipline, because the whole idea of discipline is kind of backwards, because yes, you can force yourself to do things that you find unpleasant for a short period, but to do that long term is almost impossible. I would argue that most people just can't, and nor should they. The people who do things that are difficult on a consistent basis have found ways to extract pleasure from it. Yeah. We're all hedonists at heart. So, the people who are getting up at 4 a.m. to go for a run in the rain, in the dark, are doing it because they take pleasure from being fit. They take pleasure from the endorphins of running. They take pleasure from, whatever the effects they get out. So it overrides the temporary discomfort. Same thing for writing with me, sitting down every day, working on the same project for months, if not years, with a very delayed gratification process is incredibly difficult. But I have found things within the process that reward me. And thus, those rewards, even on a day-to-day basis, override the larger discomfort. So someone might look at me and say, boy, Christopher's awfully disciplined to sit down every day and write pretty much every single day and always be thinking about this stuff and working on it. It's like, well, I found ways to extract pleasure from it. And that's why we say to people, do what you love. That's horrible career advice, by the way. Doing what you love is horrible career advice. But it makes sense in that if you enjoy the process of whatever you're doing, you're likely going to work harder at it over the long run. And if someone becomes a doctor just for the money, they're not going to go home and be reading medical journals in their free time and trying to figure out how to best treat their patients. someone who becomes a doctor because they love healing people will do that, and as a result, over the long term, will work harder at being a doctor and will be a better doctor in the end, and probably will make more money at it because they're a better doctor.
Sure.
Maybe. So that's kind of where I come down on all of that.
I do emphasize on working on a project for a long time, as you may know, and enjoying delayed gratification. When you have a strong why, as you also mentioned, it all makes everything simpler. And
Yeah, but again, you can't delay gratification too long. The human brain is not built to wait for gratification for years. We're just not built that way. And that's the case like with writing a book. I might start a book now, and it may not be published for 2 years if I'm lucky. And that's just too long to wait for your dopamine hit. So instead, I focus on my daily behavior, my system of living, and I take gratification from that. So if I sit down and write for X number of hours, and I write 1,000 words, or I write 2,000 words, even if it feels like I'm still miles and miles away from finishing the book, I still let myself feel good because, hey, I did what I was supposed to do that day.
yeah,
And then if I go spend time with my family and exercise and get outside, and every one of those things are what I'm supposed to do day to day, so I let myself feel good. It's like if you want to become an Olympic athlete, that's a goal. It doesn't do anything for you. If instead you say, I'm going to focus on training at my sport every single day. I'm going to focus on eating right. I'm going to focus on sleeping right and building my relationships in my life. Those are daily behaviors. That's your system. If you focus on that, you're going to get to your goal, but the goal itself doesn't do anything for you.
True. The journey matters most, as some say, that I
as always
start to understand. But yeah, if you find happiness and dopamine from your foreseeable future, your day, what you can control, it makes you push through every challenges. Or
have you ever heard of the 80-20 rule? Yeah, I mean, the 80-20 rule, for those who don't know, is like with diet. They say, focus on getting your diet right 80% of the time and don't worry too much about the other 20%. I'd argue that's true for a lot of things. Focus on enjoying the process 80% of the time, and then if it's miserable the other 20% of the time, you can deal with that. You have a bad day, something happens, you get injured, or you're just not feeling the writing or whatever. You can deal with it if it's working 80% of the time.
I see. So I also emphasize on many points you say throughout your response that I try to note in my head, which is the importance of words and what they do to our body when we utter them. And I have experienced that we feel this more and more once we've gotten aware of what they can do to us. When you sort of, if I may say so, relapse into bad mouthing yourself, you can feel that whole difference. And same for since our body is composed mostly of water. I don't know if you've heard of the work of the doctor Emoto.
I'm not sure.
It's a bit like, well, it's similar in some point with the Coué method, where you're talking to your body and you can see changes. He made the experience of uttering words on water and placing pictures of known persons, either for good or mostly bad actions, and then crystallize the water and see the difference under an electronic microscope to see how the crystals were forming differently. And it's quite edifying to see how much our words, as benign as they may look, have an impact. That was also a concern that's been said already, but in my next question, did you think of the ancient language not just as a mechanic, but also as a parable of our own language, which will mean that if, just like the elves, we will be more aware of the impact of our words, we won't be too eager to use them as we do, brushly and inconsiderately.
I was thinking about how language itself feels like magic to me. You know, you can write a
Yeah,
story, you can convey information. Language, in very many ways, is our greatest tool and makes us human, along with, I would argue, our hands, our ability to manipulate objects and use actual tools. But one without the other wouldn't really work and wouldn't allow us to be a technological species. We could have language with no ability to handle tools, and then, you know, we wouldn't be what we are now. But I find language fascinating, and I find the function of language incredibly interesting. And it goes, you know, there is this idea in the real world, going back to the beginning of time, that to name something is to understand it and gives you a certain amount of power over it, whether that's a person or a physical object. And, you know, the ancient language is just you know, taking that to the taking that idea seriously. And I'm not the first author or tradition to do that,
mm,
but you know, is it a parallel? Is it a metaphor? I don't know if I'd go that far, but it definitely ties into the use of language and my ideas about it.
yeah. Well, that's an idea that a thought that occurred to me as in when I was rereading the cycle, because um, during the last years of my life, I came to ask myself a fair amount of questions on, case in point, the importance of words. I was like,
Mm.
oh, this is strangely alike to what I've read here. And but I'm really glad I discovered your books when I was 10, although I did not grasp all of the messages, of
Mm.
course. It definitely sticked to my brain. Well,
I mean, what's crazy to me is there is a theoretical arrangement of words right now that would give us a massive breakthrough in science and physics. There's a theoretical arrangement of words that, were I to write it or anyone else, would influence how people think about the next presidential election to such a degree that it might actually change the election. These are all theoretically possible, and you can think of many, many other, um, you know, things that you could do with language. We just lack the knowledge of what those arrangement of words are, and so we're constantly clawing our way toward new knowledge and new uses of language, which again I think is amazing. There's some debate, if we shift topics slightly to artificial intelligence. I've seen some people debating like how much of our intelligence is actually just verbal ability, because the AI is imitating that, but of course it doesn't seem to actually understand anything. AI doesn't understand context. It doesn't actually understand meaning, um, and yet it's able to fake intelligence to a degree, which raises some interesting questions about our own intelligence.
true. One of the main plot or questions of the movie I, Robot from 2004.
Hmm. Well, my main feeling at the moment is at least things like Chat GPT, and it's essentially glorified autocorrect. You know, it's looking at massive models of language and massive amounts of input, and it's essentially auto-correcting in a very sophisticated way. But it has no self-awareness, and it has no um, understanding of what the individual components actually mean.
And gladly so, if you only ask me.
Well, yeah, because if we end up with self-aware intelligence, artificial intelligence, you know,
Yeah.
things are going to change radically, far more than they are at the moment.
Well, there will be the movie once more, Ex Machina. I don't know if you've watched it.
Of course.
Yeah, great movie.
Hmm.
That will be dire. One less parenthesis about AI. There's soon a meme that will be using for the very first time AI generated images.
Hmm.
I've never done that before, so yeah, just a quick wink. All right, and yes, that's what I wrote this quote from you regarding what we just discussed about the ancient language. It's Eragon saying, well, you, from his POV, his study of ancient language had taught him to appreciate the importance of names, names or power, and language alters your mind in ways that are hard to understand, to explain.
Mm-hmm.
It summed it up well. Um, I believe so, at least. And one more thing, as I'm currently rereading Inheritance, I'm now at the Vault of Souls arc, and
Mm.
I wondered, as I tried to delve into what could be the deeper meaning of Eragon's journey, it appears to me that from the beginning to the end, it's a quest of research of identity, of self-discovery, the who am
Hmm.
I question. And in that, as I was reading the chapter, a question of character, which is like the pinnacle of inheritance,
Yeah.
like moment, I wondered if you happened to put yourself through the same examination Eragon and Zafira did on Drawing while searching for the true names, and if you had an idea of what your true name could be.
Well, I think that identity and character and figuring out who you are is one of the central things of adolescence because you transition from a child to an adult and figuring out what sort of an adult you're going to be and how you fit into society and how you're going to function as an adult once you have agency and power versus a child who usually doesn't have a whole lot of agency and power. And so that's why writing about adolescence to me very naturally becomes writing about identity and who you are. And yes, it's something I've spent a large portion of my life thinking about and figuring myself out. I think I have a pretty good idea of who I am and have had a pretty good idea for a long time. If you asked me to guess at my true name, I think I could come pretty close. But what's the old saying? An unexamined life is a life not worth living, and I think that's true. Um, you have to be careful staring into the abyss because sometimes it stares back. And now I'm speaking just in nonstop cliches, but you don't want to drive yourself insane by uh, overthinking things. But it is useful to know what your motivations are, what your morals are, what drives you, what causes you to not function as a person, and that is all those are useful tools. That's just like physical tools. It's just like being able to exercise or knowing how your body reacts and how to improve it and how to harm it, and you need those mental things as well. And it's a lot of, I mean, look, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I would love to just coast through life and not think about these things.
Yeah, some people do, and
Some people do, and more power to them. I'm not saying this is necessary or perhaps even the best way to live, but at least for me, it allows me to do things that I wouldn't be able to do before because I understand how I function. And since I am my own tool, if that makes sense, I need to understand how I function so that I can do the things that I'm trying to do.
you know, living intentionally and not living a life
Yeah.
unchecked.
I mean, I would say there'd be a very similar process if I were an athlete. I'm too old for that now, but if I'd been starting out and were pursuing a physical career, understanding my body and how my mind influenced my body, and then vice versa, and all the things I could do to get my body respond the way I wanted to would have been paramount in my life. And I would have studied that, both intellectually and then just physically, trying to figure out how things work. So, you know, understanding life and those around you is important,
Yeah, paramount, even I would say,
paramount.
because it allows us to, well, it's a no-brainer to make more enlightened question choices and so forth.
Well, I mean, another thing is we only get one life. We only get one body.
Hmm,
And you might as well understand it as well as possible because what else have we got?
true. Not one thing to squander.
No.
So I have, now that I've gone through my main questions, some smaller questions that I wanted to ask if we had enough time. I believe we do.
Yeah, we've got a little more time and then I'm going to have to run here.
Cool. So something very maybe trivial, but that's been nagging in my mind for a while. What happened to Tornak, Murtagh's horse? Is he still alive? How are you doing?
No comment.
Okay, okay, that's fair for me. Um, what will happen if a dragon was to hatch in the Durgrimstadsverden Rakanwen?
Um, I'm not sure that the dwarves would allow them, any of those clan members, to come before the dragon eggs.
Okay,
If that did happen and one dragon hatched for them, I think it'd be very difficult politically, and it's entirely possible that the dragon for whom it hatched would be exiled from their clan.
Well, okay. I thought that maybe we'll make them change, but no, it's unlikely after all, since they showed so much antagonizing
I
toward
mean,
Eragon.
come on. How often do people change their beliefs? Not often.
Yeah, set aside an entire group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, changing in habit on a personal level is already hard when we observe it well, in our life or in someone else's. So,
Yeah.
two questions regarding the adaptation. So, regarding the Disney adaptation, what qualities, if I am only asking you and you personally, and if you had all the liberties in the world, what qualities will you be looking for in person for incarnating Eragon, beyond, of course, a resemblance and good acting?
I mean, is there anything more?
I don't know, peculiar.
No, I mean, I'm not sure I'm willing to commit to an answer of that at the moment because it's such a particular thing, and there are probably a number of people who could do a good job in the role, and um, it's a hard role to cast because it needs to be someone who can capture, youth, but at the same time be old enough to be convincing in terms of wielding a sword and having adventures. I remember when I was 15 and I thought I was so grown up, and now I see 15-year-olds and I look at them and go, they're babies. They're babies, but they're not, because you're more, you are in many ways are mostly a grown up at that point. You're just not entirely grown up. So I don't know. I think it's going to be a long conversation to have with the producers about exactly who we're looking for and what we're looking for, and then we have to see who's available.
True. And that's one more thing that came back to my mind that I wrote but went over earlier. You say that you wrote Eragon based on you at the beginning. So what are the commonalities that you now still have with Eragon to this day?
Curiosity.
Yeah.
Eragon is very curious about the world and wants to understand it and learn, and that's definitely something I still have and still pursue. Probably a willingness to tackle big adventures and projects, even knowing it's going to be a huge thing, and then maybe a basic sense of optimism, all things considered.
Okay, those two last points I do relate to.
Yeah,
I see. And final one, since you mentioned that you will like to have a new face for this role, do you think it will be a good thing, if a possible one, to make an open casting even in Europe as to find the best Eragon possible?
I have no idea how Disney would want to handle this, so this may be completely out of my control. I know that when Fox was looking for an actor to play Eragon, and I wasn't part of the process back then, and I only found out about this after the fact, but they auditioned some insane number of young actors for the role. I mean, it was, well over 1,000. It might have been more like 10,000. I mean, it was just some insane number of actors, and I know they were kind of despairing. So I think an open casting would be a great idea, just to attract talent from around the world. I actually think an actor from Europe might be a good pick, because one of the problems with casting actors from the U.S., unfortunately, is you get the American accent, which, for good or for ill, none of us really associate with an old world style fantasy story. But again, I am not, all of this is going to have to be in collaboration with the producers, with whoever the showrunner is, and I will have my say, but that's one say out of at least 3 and possibly more people.
Okay. It's a good thing to know this, and I still keep an eye out for, as you may know, whatever news there are regarding the project.
Yeah. Well, when and if we get a showrunner in place, and of course everything's shut down in Hollywood because of the holidays right now, so hopefully beginning of the year we will actually be able to nail something down. When and if we get a showrunner on the show, then that person and I will write probably the pilot and maybe the first two episodes, or at least the pilot and the first episode. And then Disney will look at that, and that's what they'll make the decision on whether or not to commit to a first season. And if they commit to the first season, they pull the lever on that, then we go full speed ahead. And then the whole machine kicks in terms of pre-production and design and costumes and casting and music and directors and all of that. So getting to that point is the first big hump, if you will. The first big hill to climb. Yeah.
Right. I hope it will, and I will keep an eye out for the news and for any news about the castings, if and when there is one. And okay, well, that was it. Do you have a word for the end?
I just want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who came to my events during the book tour, both in North America and especially in the UK and Europe. It was absolutely amazing to see the turnout, especially in places I haven't been before, like Vienna and Stockholm, which I really enjoyed, as I did all the places. Seeing the number of custom books people brought up, tattoos, children named after the characters, and of course, just in general, all the personal stories that people were telling me about their relationship with the series. It was absolutely fantastic. And it was an amazing experience, and all the more amazing to be having this 20 years after Eragon came out. So, as I said, a big thank you from me to them, and I can't wait to write some more stories for everyone.
Well, I'm most glad to hear this. Well, for my part, I shall say that I thank you for writing these books, who arrived at some point in my life where I needed them more than I thought I did. Some great themes, such as the respect toward the nature and the animal realm that are really discussed in your books, stayed with me. Eragon's concern toward the pain they feel, and all we've discussed, the language, the magic, making real something in unreal circumstances, that are things that I'm very thankful for.
Well, and thank you for this interview, and of course for all of the tasty Eragon memes, Inheritance Cycle memes you've been posting over on Instagram. It's been fun.
And it will be, since I have a lot more in my pack.
Well, I'm sure Murtagh gave you some more material as well.
Yeah, sure. I already actually have one meme out about Murtagh, about a goat, and I have many more in mind. And the fun fact about memes is that yesterday I posted one featuring Anthony Starr from The Boys, and I woke up this morning and saw that he actually liked the reel.
Oh, he did.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was unexpected and really cool, because what were the odds of him seeing that I tagged him?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I love with the internet and social media is you just never know who you can interact with, and lets you interact with people that otherwise would be impossible for you to connect with. So that's the good part of social media.
Yeah. As someone wrote, what is possible and impossible is often a matter of perspective.
Very true. Very true. Well, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for the interview, and thank you to everyone for watching and or listening to us.
Thank you, Christopher, for your time and for this amazing exchange.
My pleasure.
See you. Bye.